Okay, metacognition, or how to do good in your classes, how to do well in your classes. Okay, what can psychology teach us about academic success? In this first part of the lecture, I'll just go through some background information on how memory works, and then we'll apply that information to we'll use that information and apply it to different study strategies and learning strategies. So first of all, we'll start with memory. Memory is simply the persistence of learning over time, right? We store information and hold it in memory. And so the memory process includes encoding or getting information into memory, storing it, and then retrieving it. And this is the Atkins model of information processing and how it is that we input and then retrieve information from long-term memory. It's a little bit complicated, so we'll take it step by step here. First, something happens, external event that occurs, like me talking during a lecture. That external event, sensory input, things that you hear, see, etc. That sensory input goes to a very brief form of memory called sensory memory. Sensory memory is the very first stage in forming memories, and it's a very brief recording of information that we hear, see, etc. For information, the information about visuals, or the memory for visual information is called iconic memory, and the memory for things that we hear is called echoic memory. Again, they're very brief. Echoic memory for things that you hear lasts about 4 seconds. You all have probably had the experience, I have this experience all the time with my wife, where, she says something, but I'm not really paying full attention to her. And then I'll say, like, what did you just say? And then but before she has a chance to say what she said, I already know what she said. You probably had that experience, right? Where you sort of still have what they said in the back of your head. That's because whatever is said, you basically record 4 seconds of it. And you have this constant 4-second loop of echoic memory for things that you hear. Iconic memory is much briefer. It's only about 200 milliseconds or so. And we can illustrate, just everyone look at this screen, okay? And you're going to see a series of letters. And then after you see the series of letters, I'm going to go back to the blank screen. And what you're going to notice is the letters are sort of burned in to the background. That burning in of those letters into the background is your iconic memory. And it's very brief, right? About 100, 200 milliseconds. So that's your iconic sensory memory. All right, so we have events. I say things, that leads to sensory input or audio. That goes into sensory memory. From sensory memory, from there, we pay attention to certain things, certain stimuli in the environment, right? In particular, we're going to pay attention to novel information, novel or information that's different than what we're used to, right? So the heater is on right now. You can hear it if you pay attention to it. But most of you probably essentially tune that out, the heater in the background, right? Because it wasn't novel, it wasn't changing. You pay attention to things that are changing. Okay, like that's part of the reason why I try to walk around and stuff. I'm not just, restless. I am restless, but it's not just that. I walk around so that I'm kind of a changing stimulus, so you can stay a little more engaged. The information that we pay attention to is encoded or converted into information that can be stored, right? The stimuli we pay attention to is encoded into something that can be stored and potentially into long-term memory. First, it is Encoded though, let's think about what might disrupt attention and encoding, particularly in the classroom. We're just at this stop here of this step here of encoding. What might disrupt attention and encoding? Distractions. Thank you. All right, cell phones, internet, things that can disrupt encoding. If you're asleep, right, or if you're tired, that's going to disrupt your attention if you don't have a good night's sleep the night prior. So if you minimize distractions and put yourself in a situation where you're well rested, you're, I don't know, well fed, you're not hungry, it's going to be easier to pay attention. And we're only going to remember the things, we only have the potential to remember things that we pay attention to. So if we're not paying attention, there's no chance. And then now you have to waste all this time later on studying the information when maybe you could just learn it in the first place if you were paying attention, right? Not to say that studying is a waste of time, but you might study less if you paid more attention in class. Right. Information is then sent to working, also called short-term memory. Temporary holding place for the information before it's sent over to long-term memory. And so information is encoded from working memory to long-term memory storage. And when we retrieve information, like when we're taking an exam, that information is brought back into working memory where we work with or use information to formulate our answer to the question, right? Or use it for whatever task we need to do. All right. Part of the Atkinson-Schifrin model is what we've talked about is the process for forming explicit memories, effortful memory formation. But there's also this process of forming implicit and using implicit memories, which are more so habits. So implicit memories is top track, this automatic processing, formed through automatic processes that bypass conscious encoding. That's why these implicit memories operate very quickly, because they bypass all this. This is going to be things like typing. You know, if you type a lot, you get really good at it. You can type really fast, almost as if you're not thinking about it. Playing an instrument, playing sports, those sorts of things lead to the development of implicit memories. Whereas explicit memories are of conscious facts and experiences where we use this effortful process to encode and retrieve information. We're thinking about learning in an academic situation. This has to do with the forming of explicit memories. Questions? All right. So, information processing strategies, or how to do well at your classes at John Carroll. One aspect that we can focus on is the encoding of memories from working memory to long-term memory. In other words, the learning of information that goes into long-term memory. What we found is that this encoding process is most effective when it's spread out over time, when you learn information repeatedly over time. It's called distributed practice. Here is a forgetting curve that illustrates how distributed practice contributes to retention over time. So what we have here on the y-axis is the percent of information remembered, and on the x-axis is the time since you first learned the information, right? So let's say that I'm studying for a Spanish test or something like that, and I have to remember, 10 terms, or 100 terms for the Spanish test, okay? Right now, if I have all those 100 terms memorized for the first time, in 30 minutes, I'll remember about 60% of those terms, and then about a month later, I'll remember about 20% of those terms that I've memorized right now, okay? Now, what happens when we our practice and memorization of those terms? If we were to memorize the words now and then go through the same process, 25 minutes later, now the curve gets shallower and we remember more in the long term. This is the third and repetition, a few days later, the curve is much shallower. We remember more in the short term and the long term by having this, using this distributed practice approach. And so this would be spacing out your studying for your exams and things like that. In the week prior to an exam, study a couple days later, a couple days after that, etc. Said, massive practice does lead to some pretty good short-term learning. This is the cramming strategy. Quite frankly, I used quite a bit of the strategy throughout my education, and it was effective, at least in the short term. And, the thing about it is, regardless of the number of repetitions, we remember most in the short term, right? So if I were to hypothetically memorize 100 Spanish terms right now, and I take the test 15 minutes later, I'm probably going to get an A on that test. All right? Now, on the final, if it's cumulative, I'm kind of screwed, all right, because I'm not going to remember in the long term. Or if I actually want to use Spanish and speak the language, it's not going to be very good in the long term. But it is the case that short-term practice, that in the short term, that your highest gain, that your best retention is in the short term. So what does this mean for your study strategies? I would suggest doing distributed practice, but make sure that your last practice session or your last study session is like the day of the exam, right? So that the material's fresh. And some of you might be much more comfortable with risk, and maybe just studying it once is good for you. Yeah. And I guess that'll work for getting a good grade. As we'll talk about with the GRE, a major component of that test, that standardized test you have to take to get into graduate school, is learning vocabulary, like about 1,000 vocabulary words or so. It's commonly on the test. And what you need to do is not only distribute your practice, but make sure that like the day prior to that test, you're spending 8 to 10 hours memorizing words so that you have them, you can easily recall them the next day on the exam. So anyway, that is, as they say, is that. Questions? All right. Probably like, did our professor just tell us to cram? Sort of, kind of. I'd keep it real if you haven't noticed yet. All right. Processing strategies, testing effect. In general, what's going to lead to the best learning is practice and testing yourself, testing your retrieval for information. Okay, very effective. What we have here in this table is Dunlosky and colleagues surveyed all the cognitive research in psychology about learning and learning strategies. And after they surveyed all this research, read through it all, they rated various learning techniques in terms of their utility, ranging from low to high. Okay, and what you'll distributed practice, high utility. Okay. Practice testing, high utility. Practice testing is going to be, you guys probably do this, where you make flashcards and you test yourself, or the way I used to do it was I would have my notes and I would like cover up terms or different information and see if I could remember it or describe it, right? This is high utility. It's a good way of studying. The reason for that is you're practicing retrieval of this information. The more you practice the retrieval of information, the easier it is to retrieve that information. It's kind of like walking a path in the woods. If several people have walked a path, it is easier to walk that path. The grass is trampled down, sticks are moved out of the way, etc. Whereas if just one person has walked that path, if you have just retrieved this information once, it's going to be harder to follow that path. It's going to be harder for the information. It's going to be harder to retrieve the information from long-term memory. So yeah, very effective strategy. Another thing to keep in mind is the level at which you process information matters in terms of how you retain it. We remember information better if we process it on a deep level. Process it on a deep level. Shallow processing is processing information on a very shallow level. Like that'd be like you're trying to memorize a bunch of words and all you focus on are like the letters in the words. It's very superficial, rote level memorization. Deep processing is more so thinking about the meaning of the words. Okay. Deeper level of processing. We will illustrate how the level at which you process information influences your retention now. So I have a memory task. I'm going to read you some sentences. Try to remember as many sentences as you can. Just for a moment, everyone on this side of the room, put your head down or close your eyes. This side of the room, you guys see this, right? Okay. Your head and open your eyes. All right, I'm going to read the sentences now. Try to remember as many as you can. A seashore is a better place than the street. At first, it is better to run than to walk. You may have to try several times. It takes some skill, but is easy to learn. Even young children can enjoy it. Once successful, complications are minimal. Birds seldom get too close. Rain, however, soaks in very fast. A rock will serve as an anchor. If things break loose from it, however, you will not get a second chance. Now write down as many of those sentences as you can remember. All right, so now I'm going to show you the answers and count up the number correct that you had. Bless you. Bless you. All right, how many had none right? And how many had one right? Two right? Three right? Four right? Five right? Anyone have five? Six? Five or more right? All right, you guys notice, how many do you have? 6? All right, we'll play. um, did you guys notice who had more right? It was like clearly this side of the room had more right. It's hard to tell when if you're in front, but here was the difference. I showed this side of the room that the sentences that I were reading about were pertaining to flying a kite. So the passage you're about to read is about flying a kite. Okay, so they had a context to understand the sentences, right? It's easy to remember these sentences when you can put them in some context, when you can think more about their meaning than if they're just, 8 random sentences. Okay. So this side of the room was able to process the information at a deeper level, and thus they were able to retain it better. Okay. Now, there are some strategies, study strategies that are relatively shallow levels of processing. Okay. Like, for example, just summarizing information or highlighting things as you go through a book and read it, or rereading information you've already read. This is relatively passive and shallow ways of interacting with material, and not coincidentally, they're the lowest utility. For me, when I was a freshman, I remember I bought all the books, first of all. Second of all, I read everything, highlighted everything. Spent hours doing this. And then after a couple of weeks, I was like, man, this is like a total waste of time. I don't know if many of you guys have had that experience, but that was my experience. I found practice testing a lot more effective. And as it turns out, the data support that. All right. Another thing that leads to shallow processing is using electronics. Okay. And this is what it looks like from the professor's view from the front of the room, right? And then it looks something like this. And another factor here is we can't remember what we have not encoded, what we have not paid attention to. If someone's not paying attention to the lecture material, they've lost the opportunity to learn that information while in class. And now they have to spend their time learning the information outside of class instead of, playing video games or brewing beer or listening to Lil Wayne. So it pays to pay attention in class. Do any of you brew beer? I get, that's probably not a college thing to do, huh? All right. Anyway. We're going to read a Scientific American article here that goes into the reasons why, in particular, using a laptop during a lecture is not good. And then we'll reflect on our own use of laptops. So the article is in your booklets, the Scientific American article. Go ahead, read through that. When you're done, reflect on your own use of laptops, and then write instances when you believe your laptop use has hurt your potential for learning in the classroom. So we're going to move away from the nuts and bolts of metacognition, memory, attention, those sorts of things. And we're going to move into a discussion of a more big picture concept of mindset. Mindset is, how one, in general, approaches problems, approaches their education, etc. There's different types of mindsets that we can have. We can generally have a fixed mindset, which is, for example, my intelligence, my ability is unchanging, right? I'm really smart, I'm really athletic, I'm not smart, I'm unathletic, and that's just the way it always is. That's a fixed mindset. Or we can have a growth mindset, which is a belief system, a way of approaching life where you believe truly, genuinely believe that intelligence or any other skill or trait is changeable. You can improve. And a growth mindset focuses more on the effort that you put into something as opposed to your ability that you put into something. All right? Because the idea is that it's not just ability that leads to your successes. It's ability plus the opportunities that you have available to you, the opportunities that you seek out and take advantage of, as well as your motivation and your hard work. Those things all come together to lead to success. So we're going to
What do you think is the key to achieving our goals, our success? Some people suggest things like hard work, focus, persistence. But research shows these are all byproducts of something else, something much more powerful that we can all develop. It is this very special something that really is critical to success, and is what I'm here to discuss with you today. Someone who has achieved great success is Josh Waitzkin, a chess international master and the subject of the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer. Nobody has won all the national chess championships that Josh has. But even more impressive, when he turned 21, he took on the challenge of mastering something completely new and very different from chess: martial arts. He realized that he had learned how to grow and succeed, and he could apply that understanding to other domains. And so, he devoted himself relentlessly to Tai Chi Chuan. And after lots of hard work, many failures, and some broken joints, he became a great martial artist, and he won 2 world championships. Now he's off to jiu-jitsu. So what does Josh say is the greatest thing that ever happened to him? Believe it or not, he says, losing my first national chess championship, because it helped me avoid many of the psychological traps. The key trap that Josh avoided was believing that he was special, that he was smarter than other people, and that he didn't have to work hard. He could have thought of himself as a prodigy, but he doesn't think that he has extraordinary intelligence. He says, the moment we believe that success is determined by an ingrained level of ability, we will be brittle in the face of adversity. Josh often quotes Stanford professor Carol Dweck, who discovered that some people see intelligence or abilities as fixed, what is called a fixed mindset, while other people see them, as Josh does, as qualities that can be developed, a growth mindset. More important, Dr. Dweck discovered that these 2 different mindsets lead to very different behaviors and results. In a study she did with Dr. Lisa Blackwell, several hundred 7th graders were surveyed to determine which mindset each student had, and then they were tracked for 2 years. Results showed that the students with a growth mindset, those who thought they could change their own intelligence, increased their grades over time, while those with a fixed mindset did not. You can see the trend. The gap in performance just widens and widens over time. The difference between these 2 groups? A different perspective on intelligence. Other studies have shown similar effects for our mindset about other abilities, like problem solving, playing sports, managing people, or anything else you'd like. Dancing la Macarena. The key to success is not simply effort or focus or resilience, but it is the growth mindset that creates them. The mindset itself is critical. Research shows that when we directly try to build grit or persistence, it is not nearly as effective as addressing the mindset that underlies them. How many of us think of ourselves as not math people, or creative, or sociable, or athletic, or conversely, that we're naturals? If we're to fulfill our potential, we have to start thinking differently. We have to realize that we're not chained to our current capabilities. Neuroscience shows that the brain is very malleable, and we can change our own ability to think and to perform. In fact, many of the most accomplished people of our era were thought of by experts to have no future. People like Charles Darwin, Lucille Ball, Marcel Proust, and many others. But they, along with all great achievers, from Mozart to Einstein, built their abilities. But the key insight that I would like you to walk away with today is that when we realize that we can change our own abilities, when we have a growth mindset, we bring our game to new levels. So how does a growth mindset do that? It turns out that there are physiological manifestations to mindset. Brain scans show that for people with a fixed mindset, the brain becomes most active when receiving information about how the person performed, such as a grade or a score. But for people with a growth mindset, the brain becomes most active when receiving information about what they could do better next time. In other words, people with a fixed mindset worry the most about how they're judged, while those with a growth mindset focus the most on learning. There are other consequences of mindset. People with a fixed mindset see effort as a bad thing, something that only people with low capabilities need, while those with a growth mindset see effort as what makes us smart, as the way to grow. And when they hit a setback or failure, people with a fixed mindset tend to conclude that they're incapable. So to protect their ego, they lose interest or withdraw. We observe that as lack of motivation, but behind it is a fixed mindset. Whereas people with a growth mindset understand that setbacks are part of growth. So when they hit one, they find a way around it, like Josh Waitzkin did when he lost in chess or in martial arts. Research clearly shows these effects of mindset. In one study that Dr. Dweck did with Dr. Claudia Mueller, they had children do a set of puzzles. And then they praised the kids. To some of the kids, they said, "Wow, that's a really good score. You must be smart at this." That's fixed mindset praise because it portrays intelligence or abilities as a fixed quality. To other kids, they said, "Wow, that's a really good score. You must have tried really hard." That's growth mindset praise because it focuses on the process. Then they asked the kids, "Okay, what kind of puzzle would you like to do next? An easy one or a hard one?" The majority of the kids who received the fixed mindset praise chose to do the easy puzzle, while the great majority of those who received the growth mindset praise chose to challenge themselves. Then the researchers gave a hard puzzle to all of the kids because they were interested in seeing what confronting difficulty would do to their performance. Look at what happened when the kids later went back to the set of easier problems that they started with. The kids who received the fixed mindset praise did significantly worse than they had originally, while those who received the growth mindset praise did better. And to top it off, at the very end, kids were asked to report their scores. And the kids who received the fixed mindset praise lied about their scores over 3 times more often than those who received the growth mindset praise. They did not have another way to cope with their failure. The difference between these two groups? One short little sentence. How often do we praise kids for being smart or for being great at something? We've been told that this will raise their self-esteem, but instead, it puts them in a fixed mindset. They become afraid of challenges and they lose confidence when things get hard. As Josh Waitzkin says, it is incredibly important for parents to make their feedback process related, as opposed to praising or criticizing talent. If we win because we're a winner, then when we lose, it must make us a loser. These studies show not only the mechanisms by which mindset affects performance, but they also show something else that's very important. They show that we can change mindsets. And that's important because most of us have fixed mindsets about something. Another study that showed that we can change mindsets is one in which Dweck and Blackwell did a workshop with 7th graders to instill a growth mindset in them. As a result of the workshop, the students gained more interest in learning and they worked harder. And as a result of that, their grades improved. Other studies have shown that when we teach a growth mindset, not only does it improve achievement for students as a whole, but it also narrows the achievement gap because the effects are most pronounced for the students who face negative stereotypes, such as minority students and girls in math. I've spoken mostly about children, but mindset affects all of us. In our workplaces, managers with fixed mindsets don't welcome feedback as much, and they don't mentor employees as much. And employees with growth mindsets about specific skills like negotiations become far better at those skills than people with fixed views. Mindsets can even help us solve big social issues. A recent study showed that when we expose Israelis and Palestinians to the idea that groups can change, they increase their attitudes toward one another, they improve them, and they enhance their willingness to compromise, and to work for peace. We also see the effects of mindsets on relationships, sports, health. How is it possible that as a society, we're not asking schools to develop a growth mindset in children? Our myopic efforts to teach them facts, concepts, and even critical thinking skills is likely to fail if we don't also deliberately teach them the essential beliefs that will allow them to succeed, not only in school, but also beyond. There's a lot that we can do to change mindsets, but here are 3 things that any of us can do to instill a growth mindset in ourselves and in those around us. First, recognize that the growth mindset is not only beneficial, but it's also supported by science. Neuroscience shows that the brain changes and becomes more capable when we work hard to improve ourselves. Second, learn and teach others about how to develop our abilities. Learn about deliberate practice and what makes for effective effort. When we understand how to develop our abilities, we strengthen our conviction that we're in charge of them. And third, listen for your fixed mindset voice. And when you hear it, talk back with a growth mindset voice. If you hear, "I can't do it," add, "yet." My request to you today is that you share this knowledge about the growth mindset with your family, friends, and schools, so that all of us can go and fulfill our potential. Thank you.
TED Talk here that talks about the growth mindset.